Oh, yeah, I know. I've seen it 3 times this month.
Gilda, are you decent?
Me?
To watch Rita Hayworth do her thing, it is spellbinding. As an actress working now, you say, it's so important that we remember our past and the women that brought us here. And Rita was certainly the forerunner. She really defined the word charisma, and she was so extraordinarily beautiful.
To her millions of fans all over the world, Rita Hayworth was the love goddess of the 1940s, the sensual woman whose beauty and talent kept her in the public's favor for decades. A self-described Spanish peasant, Rita Hayworth was a woman who throughout her life would be continuously transformed and reinvented to fit an image that she could never live up to. One such image from which she would never break free was that of Gilda, a mythical character that she had immortalized on the screen. To her fans, Rita Hayworth was Gilda, a woman who was bold and brash, openly sexual.
Sure, I'm decent.
To her family and friends, she was simply a loving and kind woman whose soft-spoken demeanor belied an inner strength and courage.
I just was in awe of my mother. I just looked up to her. I admired her and her beauty and her charm and her grace and her sincerity and her truthfulness. She was an amazing lady.
I think that the publicity is always on the Rita Hayworth of Gilda, this incredibly beautiful woman. I think that's part of the myth. I think that the studios were insisting on keeping up images. They were trying to correlate the image that was on the screen with what was happening in life. And many times there was a conflict between the two.
Put the blame on Maine. Maine did a dance called the Hitchy Coo. That's the thing that slew my groove. Put the blame on Maine, boys. Put the blame on Maine.
Rita Hayworth is a name that was once notable to millions of movie fans all over the world. Yet she ended her life in a state of confusion. Rita spent years suffering the effects of an unknown illness, an affliction called Alzheimer's disease. Her twilight years were spent in helplessness and uncertainty, a poignant ending to an accomplished and glorious life. She was trapped in a disease where all that she had known became lost in a foggy haze. Margarita Carmen Cancino was born on October 17, 1918 in New York to parents Volga and Eduardo Cancino. Rita's father hailed from a famous dancing family in Spain, and Margarita took great pride in her Spanish heritage.
My father was born in Seville, Spain. My grandfather and my father were Spanish, all Spanish.
She longed to be like her Aunt Elisa, her mentor and her father's partner in the dancing Cancinos. In 1926, the Cancino clan moved to Hollywood, where career opportunities awaited. While her brothers, Eduardo Jr. and Vernon, went to school, Margarita was being trained in the art of dance.
I had been studying dancing since I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, 8, and I could dance, and I danced with my father. I had a fine teacher.
Eduardo taught classes, and Rita was in those classes too. She went to his classes, which her brothers would do. They goofed off and fooled around on the top of the building with their wooden swords. And there were a lot of people in those classes, and she was the star of the show, of course, because she was the best dancer he had.
At the tender age of 13, Margarita would become the family breadwinner. Eventually, Margarita replaced her Aunt Elisa as her father's dance partner in the dancing cantinas.
There was depression at that time. So when we needed money, I worked with my father at the age of 13 at a place in Tijuana. My mother was there, and my 2 brothers were with me. I did 4 shows a day, 2 in the afternoon and 2 in the evening, and in between the shows I went to my tutor and had my lessons. Our next job was working on a gambling boat called the Rex out of Long Beach. And it was kind of a gambling boat. It was a terrible thing.
On stage, Margarita came alive. She was graceful and powerful, in control. Off stage, she remained quiet, withdrawn, painfully shy. Margarita was lonely, and her innate shyness prevented her from seeking out friends or other outlets to offset her cloistered lifestyle. She only opened up to her mother, Volga. Margarita was kept close by her father's side, allowing her very little freedom. But Margarita had a chance to earn money a new way, in motion pictures. Rita would later remember these years as some of the most stifling and difficult of her life. Yet the fact that her talent and efforts enabled her family to survive the depression was a source of great pride for her. In time, little Margarita Cancino would earn the title as the undisputed goddess of Hollywood, but she would look back on her youth with a tinge of bitterness. They had me dancing almost as soon as I could walk. I didn't have a choice, she would later say.
I was so very busy learning dances and studying. I did miss playing with children my age and all that. But I didn't know that I missed it till after a little while. I was 15. I had a great deal of poison. I looked older for my age. I had that kind of poison professional children have. People from the industry came often, executives, and they did ask my father if he would consider allowing me to make a test for films. And my father in the beginning said no. But in about 6 months later, he decided that I could possibly make a test. He allowed me to make an acting test.
Margarita began to look toward having a career on her own, independent of her father. But she was not yet bold enough to risk it alone. Ambitious, but camera shy, she allowed a new man to take control of her life. Edward C. Judson was a Los Angeles car salesman, but his expertise extended to more than just automobiles. His connections in the film industry allowed Margarita to land her first film contract with Fox Films in 1934. Her credit listed her as Rita Cancino. Though prominently featured, Fox had yet to find the right roles for her. Therefore, she played women of various ethnic backgrounds. Margarita was grateful to Ed Judson for believing in her abilities as an actress. She married him in 1937. She was 18 and he was 40. By marrying Ed Judson, she had unwittingly placed herself in the hands of another controlling taskmaster. 6 months into their union, Margarita realized that her husband considered her a business investment.
My father said that nobody liked Eddie Judson. He was too old to be married to their daughter. Apparently, he would go over there just to antagonize, particularly Volga.
Margarita's mother opposed her marriage to Judson, and her close-knit family ties were now fraught with tension. Nevertheless, she had made a commitment to her husband that she intended to honor. Her career seemed to be going in the right direction when Margarita was offered the lead role in the Fox film, Ramona.
They wanted me to play Ramona, the Indian girl, because I did have black hair, naturally black, and it was very long, and I am Spanish. After a year, Gerald Zanuck came in, and he thought I was too young to play, and he said they were going to have the very young play. But oh, I was very upset. Oh, I cried that afternoon. I never cried so much in my life. I wanted to play that role.
Fox studio chief Gerald Zanuck also decided to cancel Margarita's contract, leaving her with no studio backing. But Judson had a plan. She lived in an empty home with no furniture, while Judson invested all monies earned by Rita into the publicity and promotion of her career. Rita landed roles in various B pictures, and while she was slowly shedding her fear of the movie cameras, Judson was controlling the money.
He was a pretty domineering factor in her life. He was there all the time and pushing all the time, as her father did before him. I guess she had a father who was as persistent as Judson was, and Rita at that point was kind of a meek little girl in my eyes.
Overcoming her shyness, Rita began to appear at nightclubs and Hollywood events in order to be photographed for the magazines and newspapers.
You didn't look at anybody else when she was on board. One time she come out in a red, this here burned in my memory, a red dress, red shoes, and man, what a knockout. I mean, when she walked in the casino, the only thing you could hear was the little balls in the roulette table clicking away. She didn't stay very long. It was a publicity stunt, of course. You couldn't help but notice her. I mean, you got 1,000 people out there, and you looked right, and there she was.
The plan worked, and Rita eventually landed a contract with Columbia Studios. As well as a new title on the marquee, Rita's last name was changed from Cancino to the more refined Hayworth, her mother's maiden name. From now on, she would be known as Rita Hayworth. As Columbia's newfound starlet, she would have a new man to contend with. Columbia studio chief Harry Cohn was legendary in Hollywood, not only for his business acumen, but also for the sheer number of people who despised and feared him. After Rita spurned his romantic advances, he made sure to keep her in her place, despite her rising star.
He was a gentleman that if a young lady wanted to work at Columbia Pictures, she should put forth her charms so that he could enjoy them. And Rita Hayworth said, "Go ride a horse, because I ain't it."
An ugly name, Harry Cohn. He was constantly bothering her, and she really was affected by it. People snooping on her hallway, and he was really quite mean. There again was another father figure who was more than that.
Nevertheless, upon occasion, he did make good choices for her. In 1939, Rita starred in her first A-film vehicle opposite Cary Grant in Only Angels Have Wings. Director Howard Hawks helped Rita to develop a subtle acting style, ultimately bringing to the screen a sensuous performance that attracted attention.
He wouldn't tell me. Said it had nothing to do with us. So it seems that that's that. It's all over.
You're gonna let him go it all by himself, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever hear the word trust?
Did once, but I forgot it.
In order to capitalize on her potential, Rita's husband, Ed Judson, and the executives at Columbia decided a change was in order from the Spanish look that had been so prominent in Rita's earlier film roles. They set out to create in Rita the all-American girl next door.
She had very black hair at one time, and they lightened her hair, and she had kind of a low hairline. They had to take about an inch of her hair out with electrolysis to give her a higher, more of a forehead, but it was very painful.
Even with her changed appearance, Columbia had no suitable roles available for Rita, so Harry Cohn loaned her out to other studios. He wanted to make as much money off of his investment as he could.
Yes, obviously Biff is still nice looking.
Oh, you make me tired. Why don't you pick your mind up out of the gutter?
Why should I? You helped put it there.
When she returned to Columbia after these loan outs, she was a much bigger star than when she had left. And this was all money in Harry Cohn's pocket.
She kept that studio going. It was called the Rita Hayworth Studio because she was such a big star. I mean, MGM and 20th Century Fox had many women and stars, but she was the main one.
In 1941, Rita had the last laugh when Fox, the studio which had fired her years before, now requested her services for the vixenish Doña Sol. It would be a surprising and pivotal performance for Rita. Low-key and understated, in her own unique way, she established herself as a first-rate femme fatale. In 1941 and 42, Rita was finally able to capitalize on her talents as a dancer when she starred with Fred Astaire in You'll Never Get Rich and You Were Never Lovelier. Rita's film partnership with Fred Astaire produced a magical chemistry which movie audiences responded to.
Fred Astaire told me that she was one of the best dancers he'd ever danced with. He just thought that she was so graceful.
Rita's wholesome yet sensual image struck a chord with the public, particularly the servicemen during World War II.
To see in her the beauty of American womanhood, for whom they have fought and to whom they someday hope to return. It pays to be a GI. Miss Hayward.
I saw her as a young soldier. To go back to what soldiers felt, being away from home, being away from the loved ones was an anxiety-ridden period in their lives, and movies tended to help.
We'd sit on logs, coconut logs, and watch the movies. And the Japanese would be right up on the hill, and they'd sneak down, believe it or not. They'd sneak down and watch the movies. But you didn't know who was sitting alongside. It's dark. They go practically crazy when they put on Rita. I mean, the guys would just stare when their mouth open. It took minutes before they come to their senses again. You can't imagine what it is when you're out in them islands. You think you're going to be dead tomorrow, and you get something like that.
It wasn't only Rita's films that provided inspiration to the soldiers. Also, a tantalizing photograph of Rita wearing a risque negligee and sitting on her bed became one of the most popular pinups of World War II.
Every soldier remembers vividly the picture of Rita on the bed in a negligee. That was a magnet for men to want to go back home.
What Rita couldn't have imagined then was that this image would enchant the public for decades to come and immortalize her as a goddess of love and sex. During the production of My Gal Sal in 1942, Rita would begin a romance with Victor Mature, her co-star, and she filed for divorce from Judson. Before Victor Mature headed off to war, they became engaged. Divorce was granted on May 22nd, 1942. In order to keep Ed Judson from revealing what he considered to be scandalous and damaging information about Rita's personal life, Harry Cohn paid him $30,000 to stay out of her life forever. For the first time, Rita was happy in love and able to breathe freely and experience life on her own terms. 1943 proved to be one of her happiest years as she embarked on the Technicolor production of CoverGirl.
That is one of my favorites. It was pleasure doing, it was exciting. I was working with marvelous people. Gene Kelly choreographed that movie. We danced together. It was just fantastic.
Upon seeing Rita's famous pinup, controversial filmmaker Orson Welles had boasted, "I'm going to marry that girl." Welles was a gregarious genius whose impressive reputation made his pursuit of Rita all the more flattering to her. He was pursuing Rita with a vigor too tempting for her to ignore. In letters to her, he wrote, "I suppose most of us are lonely in this big world, but we must fall tremendously in love to find it out. You are my life, my very life. I'm too blue for anything but the sonorous repetition of my love for you." Before long, Victor Mature was a forgotten man. The coupling of Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles made headlines all over the world. They were dubbed Beauty and the Brain, but Rita didn't care. They were married on September 7, 1943 in a quick civil ceremony. There was no lengthy honeymoon. In fact, the ceremony had taken place during the shooting of CoverGirl.
I was working in publicity at Columbia Pictures. One day I was having lunch. I was sitting on a bench outside of the photo studio on the lot. And suddenly Rita and Orson Welles came rushing out. They were holding hands, giggling and laughing like children. They got in the car, and as the car started, the fender barely touched the bench I was on. I was almost thrown off. And Rita stuck her head out of the window and said, "Sorry, but we're on our way to get married." And off they went.
With CoverGirl, Rita's stardom was at its peak. The film was a huge box office success, and it cemented her status in the often fickle film industry. Ironically, at this stage in her life, stardom meant very little to Rita.
Once she became a star, I don't think she looked forward to that position with great glee. And she'd just as soon leave it. But the pressures that were put upon her to get her to that position was horrendous. Orson manipulated her. Everybody seemed to manipulate her.
Studio chief Harry Cohn was angry over her marriage to Orson Welles. He was furious when he found out that at the peak of her stardom, she was expecting her first child. Rebecca Wells was born on December 17, 1944. Rita's happiness seemed complete until the untimely death of her mother, Volga. Rita would never be quite the same. Both of her brothers, Vernon and Eduardo Cancino Jr., were soldiers overseas. When Vernon returned from the war during the Christmas of 1944, Rita flew to New York for a happy reunion. She seemed to want very simple things: love, family, and security, and yet they were eluding her. Her marriage to Orson Welles was slowly eroding. She had begun to lose faith in Orson, whose exhaustive schedule left Rita and baby Rebecca alone most of the time. She was heartbroken to find out about his liaisons with other women. Rita separated from Orson Welles in 1945, during which time she was also shooting Gilda, the movie that would forever immortalize her on the screen. Gilda would become a film noir classic. However, Rita's personal life always seemed to outweigh her professional triumphs, and disappointments she endured were sometimes too much for her to bear.
I had left the publicity department to work as a stand-in because I wanted to be where the action was, and one of the first jobs I had was Gilda. So I would wake up every morning thinking, today I'm going to spend the whole day watching Rita Hayworth emote.
Hate is a very exciting emotion. Haven't you noticed? Very exciting. I hate you too, Johnny. I hate you so much that I think I'm going to die from it.
She was, I think, very quiet, very professional, and somehow a little sad. I know that at the end of the day, Rita seemed to be more or less on her own, and word drifted around that the marriage with Orson Welles wasn't all that successful.
Put the blame on me, boys. Put the blame on me. Mame gave a trump such an ice cold no. For 7 days they shoveled snow. So
after riding the wave of Gilda's success, Rita was surprised to find that people expected her to be like the character of Gilda in real life.
A lot of times women like that who you see as these wonderful sex symbols, they're always, that's shoved down your throat by the publicity department. That's difficult for a woman because when you're that sex symbol, the sex goddess as she was, how do you say, I want to reach out and do other things? Who will take me seriously? Hollywood has a tendency to latch onto this and then latch onto what is current and discard the other without much feeling.
Because of her disdain for Hollywood gossip, Rita made a point of avoiding the press. Even renowned columnists Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper.
They interviewed me a few times very early in my career, and very early in my career I decided to never talk to either one of them again. They were barred from my set to Columbia all the time I was there. I thought, for a good reason, I didn't care what anyone else thought, and there was no way to to handle it except not to see them. So I just didn't see them.
All I know is that, yeah, it's important to try and protect the sanctity of your privacy, because if you don't, you're so exposed as an actor, you're so exposed to the world that if everything is exposed, it can become too much. It can become overwhelming.
In 1947, Columbia Pictures cast Rita as a real goddess in film who came down to earth to perform on the stage.
This was the kind of person that if you threw a challenge at her, her jaw came out about 1.5 feet. And she said, okay, fine. No matter what was going on with her private life, this lady, when she was on the set, she was shy. Very, very shy. And through all of this Mona Lisa kind of quietness, she always prevailed.
During the production of Down to Earth, Rita formed her own production company. Up until now, she had asked for little and gotten less at Columbia, but now her leverage was unsurpassed. Even Harry Cohn had to acquiesce to her demands, a triumph that was not lost on Rita.
In the end, Rita always did what was right for herself. She was a very smart woman. She had an inner strength of her own, and she stood up for herself when it came to her rights. She was a woman. She was a woman. A lot of people try to slip up on her blind side. They might try it for a while, but when it got to the point where she didn't like it, she'd whack them. If they let her down, she was out the door.
The late 1940s sparked a time of dramatic change in Rita's life. After much controversy over the release of Citizen Kane, Orson Welles was considered blacklisted in Hollywood. At this point in his career, his only hope for the creation of a film project backed by a major studio was Rita. Although separated from Welles at this time, Rita used her power at Columbia to convince Harry Cohn to finance The Lady from Shanghai. Orson would be writer, director, and star of the film. Rita was thrilled to have a part in it because she would finally have a chance to shine as a dramatic actress. For the film, her famous red mane was cut in a platinum bob, an event that infuriated Cohn and was attended by every photographer in Hollywood. Lady from Shanghai was stylistic and imaginative, but confusing, with a convoluted plot about greed, murder, and deceit.
George.
Columnist Luella Parsons, no fan of Welles, called it an experiment in what not to do.
It's true. I made a lot of mistakes.
Though Rita still had hopes that their marriage could work, Orson had failed her as a husband, but he encouraged her as an artist.
Only if we quit.
And you're not going to.
Not again.
Oh, Michael. I'm afraid.
The end of a film, and for Rita,
Michael.
the devastating end of her marriage.
Come back here. Michael. Please.
Orson was a bad man. Bad for her. She was unhappy, pretty unhappy at that time. He said, Bob, get some beautiful girls. We'll use them in the film. So I said, Orson, I don't want to pimp for you, but I know where I can get some. When Orson saw this bevy of beauties, didn't shoot a frame of film the rest of the night. And Rita and I went out someplace. Rita and I went back to the hotel about 5 or 6 in the morning, standing, waiting at the elevator. Elevator opens, and it's Orson, the cameraman, and the crew going to work, and we're standing there just getting in.
Work now became a welcome relief for Rita, and she dove into production on Loves of Carmen. Her portrayal of a free-spirited gypsy allowed audiences a glimpse of the real Rita, who with castanets in hand became lost in a world of music and dance. production ended, Rita decided to take a trip to Europe to relax and recuperate after an emotional and difficult year. But quiet calm was not the result of her vacation. While there, she met the renowned and fabulously wealthy Prince Ali Khan. The prince was, in Rita's own words, magical. She said, "We danced, and we danced, and we danced. I like to think we never stopped." Unfortunately, they were both still legally married to others. When both of their divorces were final, and the way became clear for them to marry, Margarita prepared herself to become a princess. It was grander than any Hollywood fairy tale. Rita left Hollywood at the peak of her career, and she dropped everything in order to find love and happiness.
She wrote me a lovely long letter, and she said she was not sorry to leave her career. She thought she'd be married to Ali Khan for the rest of her life.
I lived where he lived. And he lived in the south of France, he lived in Paris, he lived in London, and he lived in Ireland. It was all part of his life, and I became a part of it. I was always with Ali when he visited his people in different places. I couldn't work and be his wife. I made up my mind what I thought I should do, and that's what I did. I stopped working. He was a very vivacious man.
A life of royalty did not quite fit Rita's longing for privacy. Ali engaged in an active social life, a situation that made Rita terribly uncomfortable.
Rita was very soft-spoken, actually, and very easygoing. She loved to just put on some old clothes and just sit around and chew the fat. She was a very down-to-earth person. She wasn't put on or anything. Ali Khan loved parties. He lived for parties. He lived for beautiful women. He lived for gambling. He lived for drinking. He lived for all the things that he was so known for. He was a playboy. Knowing Rita, she would want some time at home, but she wouldn't have gotten that from him.
He was magical to her. He loved her. She loved him. They had totally different lives. Had come from totally different backgrounds. It just wasn't her personality type. She just was a person who needed to spend more time alone. She was overwhelmed by crowds of people.
Rita's innate shyness made constant social events a painful drain on her. She had difficulty with the French language. And ultimately made few friends. Overwhelmed by her life, Rita retreated into her shell. However, Rita never gave up hope to have a happy family life. She was overjoyed at the birth of Princess Yasmin Aga Khan on December 28, 1949. Ali was a doting father, both to baby Yasmin and Rebecca Wells. Rita's illusions of a settled family life were shattered, however. She was constantly surrounded by crowds of people, allowing her no privacy. She gathered her girls and headed home for America, putting on a brave face for the press that awaited her. After only 2 years, as Princess Margarita Ali Khan, Rita separated from the prince.
It just didn't work out as a marriage, but their friendship remained, and their love for each other remained.
Returning to Hollywood as a single mother was an overwhelming and depressing experience for Rita, because now she had a family to support. She was again at the mercy of Columbia's Harry Cohn.
I think Harry Cohen wanted to put the knife to her, almost punishing her for leaving. It was like a girl going back home when she'd had a send-off. I don't think that Rita really enjoyed making movies that much. I think she would have far rather been a wife and a mother. I don't think she was happy coming back at all.
It's strange how life works out. The very thing that you run away from was the very thing that saved her. She came back to her career and carried on with her career.
She didn't want to do it at all. I think it was in the afternoon. I said, Rita, let's get out of here. It was so cute. She said, what time is it? Noon. So we got in the car and drove to Arizona. Stopped at the Arizona Biltmore, not knowing it was Harry Cohen's favorite place to go. And he was directing all of this Operation Find Rita. There was a lot of noise in the hallway during the night, and a lot of screaming. In the morning, I reached out to get the paper, and the other door down the hall was getting the paper, And to this day, I am almost sure it was Harry Cohn. I recognize it. That was where the noise was coming from. Looking for Rita, and we were right next door.
But Harry Cohn would capitalize on her by placing her in one mediocre role after another. The scripts presented to her by Columbia were poorly written. Affair in Trinidad was to be her comeback vehicle. With 2 girls to support, Rita swallowed her pride and went back on the set.
Harry Cohn said, well, I want you to meet Rita. She was very sweet, like a frightened little girl. When you haven't been in front of the camera for over 3 years, there's a bit of insecurity that arises. The fascinating thing was, when it came time for her to dance, it was as though somebody turned a spark on inside of her, and suddenly she sprang to life.
She just threw herself into things, and when you see the abandon with which she would dance, all you know is you want to watch her, and you watch her in almost anything. You'd watch her wearing a paper bag. You'd rewind and watch it again, and rewind and watch it again.
I remember so well when I first met her.
Indian proverb, West Indian household hint.
Scared to death, frightened to death, but when they introduced me to her, she put her arms around me. She says, we're going to have a good time. You know, I had done a few things in movies. She was the only one that allowed me to get close to her, to put my face in her and talk to her, really talk to her instead of getting back and talking at a distance. With me, she said, come closer because you're in the scene with me.
She felt that I wasn't trying to take advantage of her. She appreciated that because every man had used her one way or another, sexually or for exploiting his own ego and so forth and so on. So she's very wary of men, very suspicious and very distrustful. She asked me if I would drive her home. And we went inside, and she said, would you like to have a nightcap with me? I said, fine. She put on a nightgown, and she got into bed, and she said, why don't you take off your things and spend a little time with me? So I got undressed, and we made love that night. It was so easy to fall in love with him. But I knew she was in the middle of a divorce. It was either all or nothing. And I said, I can't give you the kind of care and love that you really need. She kissed me goodbye, and I don't think we ever saw each other again.
Rita and Ali attempted to reconcile in 1952 to no avail. She was officially divorced for the 3rd time in 1953. While in production on the film Salome, Rita would meet another man who would temporarily take control of her life. Once again, she was charmed, and during a period of vulnerability and loneliness, she allowed nightclub singer Dick Haymes into her life. He accompanied Rita on location and became a constant companion to her. Ignoring the advice of her friends, Rita married Dick Haymes in 1953. He was wanted by the IRS and being threatened with deportation to Argentina. Later on, Rita claimed that she married him to help him with his troubles and to keep him from being deported. Also, Haymes appeared to be a devoted father to her children. She was unaware of the serious threat that he would be to her life. To attract ticket buyers, Dick Haymes always liked to have Rita on the road with him when he toured, but he was seen to both verbally and physically abuse her in public. On one occasion, he put her relationship with her children in jeopardy. While Rita was on tour with Haymes, Rebecca and Yasmin stayed with his mother. Unbeknownst to Rita, the children were left alone, and the situation was reported to the Social Services Department. Rita was charged with neglect, a situation that left her devastated and frightened. Rita had not made a film in 2 years, and she had no income. In order to pay for court costs and other legal fees incurred by Haymes, she was forced to sell her share of her production company. Both Orson Welles and Ali Khan came to the court to speak out in her defense, and the charges were soon dropped, but the damage had been done.
Haymes really manipulated her to all sorts of unpleasant situations. I witnessed all of these, and it bothered me too because I was so friendly with her. I guess I was the only one that really didn't want anything from her. We just had fun while she was married to these fellows. I think that's why we had such a nice relationship. She began to realize that everyone was having dinner on her.
As with most difficult times in Rita's life, she eventually realized that it was time to disengage and make a fresh start once again. She filed for divorce from Haynes in 1955 and took control of her life, her children, and her career. Rita longed to portray serious characters in dramatic parts that suited her age. She had been off the screen for 4 years and was ready for her second comeback.
It happened very naturally from the love goddess to the serious actress. I think she was relieved. I do remember her saying, well, you know, I'm no longer the age that I used to be of Gilda, and I have to adjust.
In 1957, Rita flew to Trinidad, where she had the chance to perform some of the most revealing dialogue that she had ever delivered on screen.
I've been passed from hand to hand. I've had to submit to things that nice young American boys couldn't conceive of in their wildest nightmares. I've lived among the ruins. Armies have marched over me.
The same year, Rita also went into production on Pal Joey. It was the perfect vehicle for her to showcase her talent as a maturing actress who still retained her own unique sexuality.
The contract would call for Frank Sinatra's name first. Frank Sinatra said no. Put Rita Hayworth first because she is one of the great stars of all times.
After all, 2 years is a long time between drinks.
No one can move like Rita. It was like a ship on sail, just floating.
With Pal Joey, Rita was waving goodbye to her many years at Columbia Studios. It was without sentiment or rancor that she ended her relationship with Harry Cohn, and she gleefully rode the wave of Pal Joey's success right out of the Columbia Studio gates. Rita was determined at this stage in her life to be taken seriously as an actress. Now that she was no longer considered the love goddess of Hollywood, she wanted to work hard to hone her dramatic skills. Helping her in this effort was a new man, James Hill.
I wanted to be in that first picture that I directed. When Carol Reed said to me, "That dame is the most talented woman I've ever seen," he said, "She makes them all look like bums." And he's quite right. She sure does. And that's when I said to myself, I'm going to get her for that picture. I'm going to get to know her. I did poorly at first. Gosh almighty, she wasn't interested in me at all. And gradually, I worked around to where I began to entertain her.
James Hill's role as partner in the Hecht Hild Lancaster production company helped her to land a truly meaningful role as Anne Shanklin in Separate Tables.
She was playing an aging, once beautiful lady, and her essential problem is her desperate fear of growing old, particularly of growing old alone.
He was at your feet. Why, his hands were shaking so much he couldn't even light your cigarette.
John, please don't be angry with me. I had to see you. I was desperate to see you.
What for? Why? To help me? You wouldn't think of telling me the truth. No, you had to have your conquest, your unconditional surrender. And if you could do it by lying and cheating, so much the better.
All right. I knew you were going to get married, and I should have said so from the beginning, but I still have some pride left.
Pride? Yes. I can see the makeup now, all right. The lines that weren't there before. The beginning. Soon there'll be more and more, and then one day this face will begin to decay, and there'll be nothing left to make a man grow, to make him want to...
Why don't you?
Much of what you are feeling, seeing those scenes, came from Rita herself, independent of any suggestions from the director.
During the production of Separate Tables, Rita married producer James Hill in February of 1958. She was once again attempting to attain a happy and peaceful home life. Rita was hoping to share quiet times and spent time learning to paint. However, Hill was consumed with his company and the many dramatic roles he had planned for Rita. Once again, she felt used. Rita still had hopes that she and Hill might take time to rest and live a normal life. He had other plans, however. In 1958, James Hill convinced Rita to play the only female lead in an all-male ensemble cast in They Came to Cordura.
Rita was older now. She wasn't the sex symbol, but she had a presence and she had a chemistry. But I always felt that she was very frightened.
At times she was shy, and at other times she was, very outgoing. She was kind of a dichotomy. I think James Hill kind of was keeping a strong arm on her. And in the evenings, we'd hear them fighting from the little cabins that we were staying in.
When both she and Hill were drinking, their arguments got out of control.
One night I'm trying to get these scenes written, and she's about half pissed, and she kept bothering me, and finally I pushed her like that. The next day, I went to where she was being made up. This makeup man was working over the eye. Now he had gotten rid of it pretty well, and he said, "How did this happen? Did your husband hit you?" And she said, "Yes, he hits me all the time."
Through all her troubles, Rita was accomplishing her desire to become a dramatic actress, yet fewer people were seeing her films. In 1960, Rita gave an inspiring performance in Story on Page 1.
What do you see?
But perhaps this was not the Rita Hayworth that held the interest of the movie going public.
In the movie we were doing, she was just not the Hayworth that I remembered with Fred Astaire at all.
Frankly, I'm prejudiced against married women who go out in traffic.
And it was not the Rita Hayworth that one thinks of.
You don't sound very friendly.
She was into the part. She was in, and it was, she had her house dress on, and she was just very simple and very quiet. Just looking into her eyes, I knew that I had to be on my toes and not pull any theatricalities here.
Rita soon discovered that it was time to release herself from yet another unhappy union and filed for divorce in September of 1961. The night before she left Hill, she told him his talent for using people was destroying him. "Why bother to write," she said, "when it's so much easier to use the talents of others?" She was gone in the morning. Rita was finally free to live her life on her own, independent of a man. But her personal triumph would not last for long. Unbeknownst to herself and to others, she was beginning to show the first signs of an unknown disease. Rita was losing her short-term memory and would often become violent.